My name is Christiane Monarchi, and I have a great privilege and pleasure in chairing this last panel talk. I've had the pleasure of working with these three lovely artists on the various platforms that I do: Photomonitor, which is now in partnership with UCA Farnham, and Hapax magazine, which I co-edit with Gordon MacDonald. And I've had the pleasure of interviewing or reading an interview with each of you on Photomonitor in the past, so that was kind of the unifying force of inviting you here today to continue the themes of land and landscape that we've heard through the day, and of course in the Photo 50 exhibition curated by Revolve. Now you three are all London-based artists. We have Almudena Romero, we have Marisa Culatto, and Alexander Mourant. So Almudena was born in Madrid, now living in London, but traveling everywhere. You've been all over at international public institutions and galleries, Victoria and Albert, National Portrait Gallery, Tate, Le 104, Tsinghua Art Museum, Photographers Gallery, Brighton Photo Biennial. The list is so long that I might not be able to finish it. Most recently, you have been taking up a new studio at the Sarabande Foundation. You've been, in the past 2 years, at BMW France Culture at Paris Photo and in Arles. You've had residencies in Switzerland, in the US, in Japan, in France, Greece, and now you're here with us in Islington. Welcome. You have your most recent book, The Pigment Change, is a giant tome, published by Fisheye. And currently your works are showing at the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris, and coming up soon you'll tell us more about things you're working on. Now I think a lot of the strands, and you're working with a range of processes, early printing techniques, and now new technologies, but you're very interested in collaborating with plants and many different ways of considering the wider ecology and representation at the same time. So I think there's a lot of interesting things that I'd love to talk to you about in your work.
Thank you everyone for being here, and Christian for inviting us. So my name is Almudena Romero, and I'm going to start talking about the latest project I finished, The Pigment Change. I understand photography from a primitive manner, an etymological perspective. Photographos like writing, and so cameras and lenses are accessories to the process of writing with light, but not central. In this broad perspective of what photography is or can be, many things can become photographic, can be used to make photographic art. And I particularly have explored plant-based photographic surfaces. I make photographic work using plant leaves and petals, but also living plants. And I think this partly connects to my work before as a 19th century photography specialist. It was a 19th century technique, the anthotype process, that uses flower petals. Anthos means flower in Greek. And I think that was a great source of inspiration for my work. In The Pigment Change, I explored over several years 50 different plants in my grandma's garden that I could use to make photographic art. I print pictures mainly of my own hands, because this part of the pigment change, which is called the act of producing, reflects on the idea of making art with plants and on the impact of artistic production. It's a self-questioning chapter. It's the beginning of an exploration of what's the impact of what I do. Does it contribute to a wider conversation on what photography is? Does it open a perspective, or does it just contribute to the problem, really? Is it just adding more work to the art industry? So look beyond the materiality to think about sustainable questions. What's the impact of what I do? Does it contribute to dynamics of accumulation and extraction? Does it open new perspective? Does it contribute to a wider conversation with other practitioners on what photography is and can be? So this part is mainly self-explorative. And so the hands do gestures that I do when I'm examining leaves. It reflects on our interdependence with nature. I come from a family of organic farmers. My grandma, where this garden is, it's in Valencia, used to be a farmer, and they did everything organically. And so I think being a farmer teaches you a lot about nature, especially if you do it organically, and how much you depend on it, and the importance of actually doing things within a certain manner, the importance of process in itself. These are all plants that I find in her garden. I print negatives, sometimes paper negatives, like in the 19th century, that I also wrap with waxes and oils to make them see-through, and then I make my photographic prints. It is an exploration of photographic matter, because I'm also trained with these 19th century techniques. Part of my research is also based on the contrast and on the materiality, how does it react to light. And I also print images on living plants. So on the left is a portrait of my mom, and those are all little watercress, cress like the one that we eat. It produces chlorophyll very quickly and to various degrees, so I can print images, ephemeral obviously, because cress, if you have cultivated it in your house, you know it lasts for a week or so. Ephemeral photographs that can be touched, but also cress produces a tonal grade of greens that allows to show volume, otherwise it would look like a photocopy. This part of the pigment change reflects on the idea of what do we want to leave to others. It reflects on ephemeral photographic artwork. For me, that these pieces disappear in 4 or 5 days is fundamental. It's the core of this work. I find it very relevant that it disappears. It needs to disappear. That's what makes it interesting. We live in a time of climate crisis, and I think that works that last for centuries are good for the photographic market. Processes that are ephemeral live in the paradox that are ephemeral in the short term, but can be practiced in the long term. They have this paradox of being unlimitedly ephemeral, while things are limitedly archival. As we live in a more and more precarious world where heating and archival conditions to preserve artworks are more expensive, and we might or might not be able to afford them, is it really important if a work is archival, like in this very precise moment of our existence? Is it important if a work lasts for a century when maybe there aren't that many people to see that? And can we actually afford that? So I think the archival question, it's a now question because we're having a more and more precarious world. Ephemeral works can be shared in a different manner. They can be touched. They may be questioning the concept of aura of artworks. Maybe it's more interesting to bring on a reflection than making something that can be bought or traded. So that's that part of the pigment change. And then there is this other chapter called Faire en photographie that focuses on who's actually the maker. Because when we understand photography in a very wide sense as light writing, maybe plants can also write with light, and maybe the way they change color could be a photographic performance, but the performer is the plant, not the artist. And so this is a documentation of a poinsettia, a Christmas plant changing from green to red. Poinsettias normally naturally change from green to red, but because of light pollution in cities like London or Paris, they might not change anymore. So poinsettias owners and poinsettias growers, they immerse these plants in dark spaces when they are not changing color to force them to change color. And I found that dynamic very interesting. It's our pollution that stops them from changing color, but then, because we want them changing, we force them again. And I think that relationship with nature, where we are constantly wanting to control processes, it's something questionable. And it also shows our understanding of other species. So this was the beginning for me of a new chapter when I started to consider the poinsettia plant as the performer, and this piece as a collaboration between the two of us. This is how the pigment change was shown. I'm trying to cast fossils in bioresin. They will mutate into ambers. I'm not particularly worried about it. I actually want the pieces to mutate. I don't want them necessarily to be stable on one form. That's not something that is relevant for my practice. I'm much more interested in using organic materials and let them evolve. Plants do also metamorphose, and I find that beautiful. So I wouldn't see why I should reverse that dynamic. And this is the book that Christiane just mentioned before, The Pigment Change. I was very lucky to work with Fisheye Editions. They represent me, and luckily I could document all the research that I have done on 50 different plants. As a darkroom photographer, well, I've tested all the qualities of those photographic papers, but it is also a much wider reflection. So in the pigment change, I invited Martin Boris, the senior curator of photographs at the V&A, to talk with Christiane Monarchi about the archivability of photography. And I don't necessarily think the whole weight of the research should be on artists. I think artists need support to make or to approach more sustainable practice. And I'm very glad that here Photo 50 and the London Art Fair is supporting you guys on that discourse, because it just shouldn't be us advancing a new perspective of photography. It's everyone's responsibility to open the door to that and to photographic works that are not stable or archival and that have other understanding of photography. And it also has conversations with scientists, philosophers, psychotherapists. And the last work of the poinsettia led me to think, well, who is actually the artist? And I started the Museum of Plant Art. So this is a project that is all mainly conversation-based. It focuses on the idea that we actually don't see plants the way pollinators see them. We cannot exactly know how pollinators see plants because they see a different spectrum of light, but we can get an approximation. And when we get an approximation, it turns out that it's a fascinating display of colors, but also vibrations, smells. It's a fully immersive experience. And I find it very hard to deny that experience as an artistic experience. We humans produce art that is not always intelligible. Many times there's nothing to understand in an artwork. It's the experience, the aesthetic experience, that is important. And so I wanted to create an experience, an immersive installation where people could at least question, why wouldn't plants be art makers too? And so I use plant-based celluloses and elements of the pollinator experience so people could establish a parallel between their experience in the exhibition and the immersive experience that pollinators have in flowers. So I also had like a choir in making music that reverberates in the space. It was a quite full-on experience, and it was a lot of fun. And then Filigrane published many of the conversations with philosophers and scientists on that work. It's mainly conversation-based, this project, because it's a project about self-questioning. How do we understand other species, and why do we deny capacities in others by default? And this is the very last project that I'm working on at the moment. It's called Farming a Photograph. I think this very much links to my family background. I was given a grant at the National Institute of Agriculture in France, and we identified 50 different types of grass wheat that had enough tonal range to produce an image. So we elaborated an algorithm that matches wheat varieties with the pixels of an image. So, and also by combining these different seeds, we can farm it entirely organically, because that's the core point, that the varieties protect each other from insects and diseases. We will see if we manage, because I've also learned that organic agriculture is very temperamental, and if you cannot be that certain, but hopefully we manage to get there. It will be one of the largest photographic artworks ever produced. I'm very interested in the impact that this might have in sharing this perspective where photographic materials can be very plural, where photography doesn't necessarily need to be analog or digital, where it can be something that you actually form. And I think the impact of a project of this size in sustainable practices and materials can be very interesting. So I'm very much looking forward finishing this, hopefully in June 2025, because farming takes time.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.